Symbolism. So why we're talking tonight about symbolism, why we decided to use the topic of symbolism. Symbolism for us means today what? We tend to connect symbolism to, I don't know, logos, companies, and this type of things. I don't know, the street signs, that's what we understand today as symbols. But symbols are extremely more complex and have a way longer history than that. And they are connected with the origin of thinking, of philosophy, of philosophical and theological thinking. The original word for symbol in Greek, it basically means two parts of a coin that was broken. It was used for several reasons, but that's where Plato came with the myth of eternal love. What Plato said, he used a myth saying that before coming here, we were some sort of meatballs with 4 legs, 4 hands, 2 heads. And because we felt so complete, so good about ourselves, the gods, they cut us in 2 parts and they throw us into the world. So the myth says that to become one again, and one part, I forgot to mention, is female, the other part is male. That's why the duality of the scope in life is to find the other half. So that's when you connect the two, that's a symbol. That's a symbol. The word symbol also in Greek entails the concept of understanding, symballanein, which means understanding but also embracing something, which is what you feel when you understand something. Now you would say, this is a Greek myth, but the equivalent of the language of the myth you can find in so many other cultures and so many other disciplines or way of thinking. In religion, for example. Would you say that the myth of the Platonic myth of the Symbolon is contained somewhere in the Bible? I would say yes. The very first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, there is Adam. Adam is alone. And he complains, says, well, I'm alone. He didn't know then. Sorry. And he asks for the Lord, then gives him a companion. Eve, right? Where does Eve comes from, according to the myth of the Genesis? From the rib. Why? Where is the rib? It's the half. Half? The 2 halves. That's why sometimes today people refer to their wife or companion, they say, as my better half. It's a biblical reference, but also in a way the Platonic reference. Now, this is just a general introduction to this concept, but this concept is also expressed in symbolic ways. Because everything in the ancient culture is not expressed directly, as we can imagine. Today we are used to a very different type of language that tends to accuracy, tends to be exact. The ancient cultures, they used a language that was covering things, but not because as it is interpreted today, because they wanted to hide things from the other. That's one of the interpretation you can make. The wisdom was the heads of the scribes and the priests. It is also true for the Babylonians, for the Egyptians, but there's also a component that wisdom, knowledge cannot be easily shared. That's why there are the Pythagoreans, that were a philosophical movement but also a sect. They had a specific way of teaching. For 5 years, for example, you were a disciple and you were just listening to your master that was talking from behind a curtain. You couldn't even see your master. After 5 years, when you passed all the proofs, etc., and you proved yourself to be a good disciple, you could pass through the curtain, and then you would meet your master and become a friend in wisdom. See, it's a completely different way of teaching. In the same way, there are a lot of hidden symbols and meanings in the teaching of the ancient people. We were just talking about the 2 halves, one half of the symbol. Now, everybody knows the most famous symbol of the Jewish tradition, which is the Star of David, called also the Magen David. Now, what has to do with the symbol? Well, the name Adam, which is not really a name of a person. I mean, we understand that way, but it is basically the noun for man in general. Can be derived into two different forms. Adame, I'm writing in Latin characters because it's very complex, and Adama. Adame means I will be similar, or I'll be like the sky, like what's above. Adame, I will be similar to what's under, to the earth. Those are to be interpreted as the two components of the human being. An aspiration to what is above us, to good, to divine, and also our earthly passion, the aspiration also to evil. The Yetzer Hara would be called in the Jewish tradition. Now, but what does this symbol mean? We know that one sign of perfection in all cultures, in ancient cultures, because we have to understand that the first way of expressing ourselves was not through language or through written language. The origin of language, of words, are symbols. And in some tradition you still have that. For example, Chinese characters that are a connection, between the two. Now, the circle was for the ancient people a sign of perfection. In some cultures, in the very ancient cultures, the circle is identified with the Lord. Parmenides extend that by making the concept of being a pure, perfect sphere. But the sphere is just, it's a rotated circle in geometry. Now, this specific symbol is being used with a circle with the dot in the middle. It was the sign of Ra in Egypt. It became, even in modern times, Jung uses this to express personality, to express the self, the human self, saying that at the center there is the ego, and then the composition between the ego and the periphery makes the self, But it is also a sign in alchemy, for example, which indicates the sun. The reason is pretty obvious. Center of the solar system, so that's the sun. I mean, it would be a stretch, but in the periodical system, for example, is the atom of hydrogen. Now, here's the thing. In geometry, a circle the radius of a circle is 360 degrees. We all studied this in elementary geometry. Now, a triangle, the sum of the angles of a triangle is instead 180 degrees, right? 180 plus 180 equal 360, meaning 360. You see the connection? They're expressing the same concept, the unity inside diversity, in a mathematical form, because there is another thing. The way of thinking for the ancient people is also symbolic and mathematical. Think of a concept that we have today, for example, geometry. Geometry 101, very simple. The first axiom of geometry is that starts with the point, right? The point is the first element, Euclides. The element, point, is the first one. We learn in school that the point has no dimension, meaning n equal 0. Now, what is the second element of geometry? It's the straight line. Straight line has dimension 1, because on a straight line I can set points that set as a dimension. But the tricky thing is, how is the straight line composed? By an infinite number of points. But wait a minute. Didn't we say that the point has no dimension? What happened? Now, I'll digress a little bit and then we'll go back to that, but this is an extremely fascinating thing, because Euclides in the Stoicheia, that's they're called the elements, is by using a sort of a trick, is teaching a very important lesson that we took a long time to learn. And this lesson is which one? There are some famous paradoxes called the paradoxes of Zeno. Zeno was this guy who wanted to prove the impossibility of movement. And to do so, he came up with a lot of paradoxes. Two of the most famous are the paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, and the paradox of the arrow. What Zeno says is, let's say that there is a guy here that is throwing an arrow to this target. Okay, pretty simple, straightforward so far. Now, A and B. But before the arrow reaches the target, B, we all agree that there is an intermediate point, C. Is that right? But Zeno is so mean that he goes further and says, well, but between A and C, considering that the line is composed of an infinite number of points, which means there is no end, there is a point D, and there is a point E, and there is a point F, and there is a point N. Then, Zeno concludes, the arrow will never reach the target. Is that true?
You cannot say no. Maybe.
Excuse me?
You cannot say no. Maybe.
That's what Zeno says. But you see, we can...
Maybe it's a space in the moon.
But this is against our common sense. And people tend to dismiss, if they are not intellectually prepared, tend to dismiss arguments that are against common sense because they don't consider that relevant. But actually, common sense is usually wrong. Common sense tells me that the earth is flat. But it's not. I know that it's not flat. And the same thing is here. If you say, you throw an arrow and you say, well, look, I reached the target, that's not a disproof. That just has nothing to do, because a logical argument has to be disproven with another logical argument. And we needed 18 centuries, no more, almost 21 centuries to have this paradox disproven by a French mathematician indirectly, whose name is Cauchy. Cauchy discovered what? He started numerical series. Numerical series are S1, S2, S3 in fractional terms, 1 plus 1/2, 1/8, etc., etc. Now, Cauchy asked a very important question. Can we have a fractionary number of intervals, like 1/2, 1/8, 1/30C, blah, 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 put together in a line like this, in a series, if here it's exactly the same, 1/4, 1/8, 1n. At the end of this interval, this infinite sum of intervals, what number will it give? Is the number going to be equal 0 or equal 1? How do you know that? Because those intervals, they are like this. They are a series that goes like this, Okay, now I don't want to trick you, because here's the thing. Cauchy found out that there are two solutions for this. And depends on the series, because there are two types of series, convergent and divergent. The convergent series, which is a series like that, will be 0. The divergent series will be 1. Now, he proves that through an extremely complex theorem, but he allows us to say, aha, Zeno, here, at the end, will be 1. Therefore, the arrow will reach the target. You see, this was already included in this little intellectual jump between the point and the straight line.
But he found two solutions, so
Yes.
you cannot say it's true, because it's
No, why?
true as it is false, so to speak, no?
No, because it depends on the series. It's like saying if I had two numbers, I can have a positive number, 1 and plus 5. But if I had 1 and minus 5, but that doesn't, I will have a different solution, I will have a negative solution. It's the same type of reasoning. Depends on the series, depends on the number. If I have a positive number, I will have a positive number. If I have a positive number plus negative number, I will have a negative number. So the same type of reasoning, which it's extremely complex for me to go into the details, but you can check by yourself if you want. But in a way, this is already contained in this jump, because that's why Euclid calls these axioms, because there are things that they cannot be proven. But he understood that the point should have no dimension, and the line should have dimension 1. Now, what has dimension 2? See, that's why I usually need a very big whiteboard, because it gets filled very easily. Now, what has dimension 2, because here's the thing, to have a line, I need 2 points, right? Okay, right. I need 2 points. Indices and 1. To have the first figure, the first symbol, I need how many points? 3. And the first figure would be then a triangle. Recall you of something. That reminds you of something? A triangle. The triangle is the first possible shape in geometry. Before the triangle, there are no shapes. That's why the triangle is so important in philosophy, in Platonic, Pythagorean, Neoplatonic philosophy, but also in theology. I think everybody has seen, the image of the Trinity, the Catholic Trinity, etc. That's why, because the triangle is the first form. And there's an entire philosophy of numbers, which the Greeks, that's very interesting, called gematria, and the Hebrew and the Jews called gematria. It's the same word used for the same concept, which is the art. And the reason is that, because Greek, same as Hebrew, has alpha, beta, gamma, or aleph, bet, gimel. They are letters, but they can be numbers. If I have a Greek letter like this, it's a letter. But if there is this sign, it's a number. Therefore, A alpha is 1, B is 2, gamma is 3, etc. So they use letters as numbers. So you can read, same as people do, for example, in Kabbalah, they read the Bible in the numerical terms. The same thing can be done for Greeks. And that creates all this symbolism, that's numerical, symbolic structure of things that is not just in the Western world. Try to think of another concept that is very similar to what we are discussing, and it's from the Far East. It's very famous. You find people tattoo this everywhere, etc. It's called yin and yang. Right? Isn't that the same concept? Half and half. 180 and 180. The unity inside diversity. That's a concept that the Latin used to express as opposta non opposita sed complementa sunt. The opposite are not opposition, but they are complementary. That's why this was used by a great physicist of last century, whose name was Niels Bohr, in his crest, because he became awarded the knighthood because of his discoveries. And he used the idea that opposites are not opposite, but are complementary. He is also the discoverer of the principle of complementarity, but we don't want to go in that part. So, as you can see, this develops an idea, an understanding of things that is extremely symbolic. But I want to extend a little bit on that. Even our concept of good or evil can be transposed in numerical terms, as the Neoplatonic did. How? Again, 1, see, perfect unity, peace, rest, no problem. Where the problem starts? 2. So 1, no problem. 2, duality, problem. 2, in Greek, is said duas. Okay? Does it sound somehow familiar? Yeah? What did you say? Devil? Perfect. Perfect. That's exactly diabolos. Diabolos. The devil contains the root for two, for duality. That's why 2 has been considered by some mystic tradition the number of evil, not 666, you know. By the way, 6 contains also the 2, but we don't want to go in. See, the numerology is the next step to this symbolic understanding of the world. And then you will have that in so many other aspects. Christianity, for example, is completely filled with these topics. You know, for example, and you see the symbol, sometimes you see that on cars or as a bumper sticker. Now, this symbol is X. I always forget. The Ixos, you know, or Ichthyos, which is, well, in Greek means fish, but each word you can use is Jesus, Istos, Theos, Ichos, Soter, which means Jesus Christ, Son of the Lord and Savior. And that was a way that Christians used to put in their house so that they would not be recognized by the Romans because they were persecuted. So this was one of the many symbols. Their symbols of the Christians are many. But this goes into a political use of symbols, you know, which is like flags, and we're not going there. But I will go back to theology, to philosophy. There is a famous statement by Plato when asked, where does philosophy start? Plato says that philosophy starts from wonder, from the feeling of wonder. Wonder in front of the world. And this is a beautiful explanation, but we miss a lot of this explanation if we don't understand all the symbolic meanings of that. Now, wonder in Greek is thaumazein. Thaumazein is a word that is related to Tauma, who was a titan, king of the sea, somebody who had a lot of strange dealings, but he had a daughter. His daughter was, in German you would say Iris, but Iris in English, and she was the goddess of the rainbow. See all the connection? So Plato connects philosophy with wonder, and what greatest element for an ancient person wonder is than to see the rainbow. There is a symbolic opening in this statement that is completely missed if you don't know the history behind, if you don't understand the language, if you don't know that it's trying to hide things in plain sight. Instead, so whenever, as soon as you learn this, whenever you see a rainbow, you will always think of Plato, and you will always think of philosophy, and you will always see that the root of philosophy, actually, this is a very powerful statement, is emotional in its nature. Wonder. Not saying, it's not a German philosopher that would say it's the reason, the pure reason is the dialectic. No, it's telling you it's the wonder. Greeks had this great talent to go to the root of things, you know, explain things in an extremely punched way, you know, not that you had to follow and fall into the trap of a line of reason. It's like, look at the rainbow. What do you think? What happened to you when you look at the rainbow? That's true, because it puts you, it's the sense of wonder, it's everywhere. And anyway, apart from other, I mean, are there any questions? Because you can stop me at any time. You know, I'm not here to just. Any questions? Okay. Think also of the identification of this sign with the way the divine, you know. First of all, that proves or shows a connection between the ancient previous traditions, which has been proven in late years that Greeks did not technically did everything by themselves. What is called, for example, the Pythagoras theorem was found in cuneiform tablets, Babylonian tablets that dated 1,000 years before Pythagoras, or certain concepts of the Greek philosophy are, I would say, Heraclitus with the concept of fire, which is a clear element. And this is also the first concept that the Egyptians used to identify the divine. But here also there is a nice, interesting trick. The god Ra, that was one of the symbols associated with Ra, which was the god of sun. Again, you see how the symbols transform themselves. They are taken, they are used again. This symbol from ancient Egypt reaches the alchemy. But there is another thing in here. The you and I. See, again, this reflection, this continuous reflection of ancient tradition between what's above and what's in here. What is it? Again, this one, I will be similar to the sky, Adamet. I will be similar to earth, Adamah. Put together makes the man. The man is the combination of those two factors. And ancient thinking keeps saying that over and over and over. In no way, think of one of the most important teaching of the Delphic knowledge, which has been taken as part of the philosophy of Socrates, which is know thyself. Noscete ipsum. It's know the invitation to know yourself, to learn about yourself. The human being is always the center of all this philosophy. Jesus is saying something extremely similar when he's saying, when they ask, where is the kingdom of God? He says what? It's inside of yourself. Isn't the same concept? Over and over and over and over. It is repeated by all tradition in so many different ways. Christianity, as we said, takes full hands from these traditions. Like, think of the symbolism of the cross. The symbolism, again, contains all these elements because, the cross you put in a circle, each part, you have 360 at the end and blah, blah. But you also have the elements. Fire, water, air, earth. But you also have what? Again, up and down. And think of...
also duality.
Yes. These symbols are everywhere. You just have to open your eyes and then you will be able to see. When you go to museums, you will see there's a plethora of these symbols. It's unbelievable how many they are, repeated in so many different forms. Sure.
For example, we went to the Buddhist, Hinduist temple, and I saw the swastika.
There you are.
Yeah. But it was in another way. Opposite way. Yeah. And I asked the guide. So what is the symbols here? So it should be in Hitler's time instead. And she told that in Hindu religion, it means that when you draw like this, opposite of what Hitler did, it means it brings luck.
Yes.
And Hitler put it in another way. So, I don't know, he did it oppositely or...
I don't know about superstitions of that kind.
At the end it brings unluck. So.
Yeah, but of course it's a very ancient symbol that was there before the Nazis, of course. But regarding to luck, I would like to offer a quote by this famous physicist that we mentioned before, Niels Bohr. Once there was a journalist that went to his house and saw that he had a horseshoe on his door. And he was very puzzled. He said, but you are such a scientist and rationalist, how come that you have a superstitious symbol? Bohr looked at him and said, well, you might be right, but I've been told that it works even if you don't believe in it. As a superstition, it's you take it the way you want. There is no connection, but certainly. But anyway, you see this, also these symbols that you see here and there, the opposition, for example, between male and female, has been used in alchemy, for example. The same triangles up and down, they are used as the elements of fire and water, but also for the opposition, because that's an interesting thing. The Western tradition evolved into the concept of duality that you will see everywhere, but the symbolic still tends toward unity. So you have a conceptual duality in a lot of things. For example, evil is duality. But for whom? Because you have to say for whom. Because if you, of course, for Christianity, yes. But in the Jewish tradition, for example, I mean, there's a concept that we really don't understand about the Almighty in the Old Testament. Or the ancient, I prefer to say ancient because it's not old, it's ancient. Is that it is monotheistic. Monotheistic means that everything comes from one. So there is no two. Two is the product of dualism, of the dualistic mentality that we developed in time to explain things. That makes you, you see, there are all the pseudo philosophical attack to the concept of the divine. When they say, how can an Almighty that is so powerful and so good create earthquakes? One of this attack started first in the 18th century after the famous earthquake of Lisbon, which I find a very big shame that the European thinkers were so concerned. I mean, it's a horrible thing, of course, but they were not at all touched by a similar earthquake as dangerous that happens 10 years before in Santiago in South America. That was uninteresting for them. That doesn't matter. That's not for us. While the one that happened in Lisbon, they will, how can a Lord that is so just allow blah 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 this and that? It is it's an understanding of the divine rooted into duality. The best answer that has been given to this is by saying, how do you know? Which is Plato, when he uses a sentence by Euripides. Plato says, how do we know if what we live is not death and real life is what happens after death? So the same thing, the same argument can be strongly applied against all these pseudo-philosophical arguments, saying, well, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know what is our real destiny? How do you know if all that we see is not completely unreal? Which is basically a conclusion that philosophy ended up with, with Descartes, which is a reinterpretation of Plato, because Descartes starts from the absolute doubt. He says, I have to doubt everything, then he goes back and he takes what back? Cogito ergo sum, which means he takes the thinking as the center of the universe. But it's a disguised way to say he takes our little small person as the center of everything, which is an old ambition of human arrogance. But on the other hand, he questions everything. But for us, it's even easier. I mean, think of virtual reality. How do we know if this is not virtual reality? And people would say, oh, because I can touch and feel it. Yeah, but that's a very poor argument. Also because what you touch and feel, again, common sense, is completely wrong. Because when I feel this, I think it's solid. But physics teaches me very clear that this is not. And why? Because physics teaches you that the distance between the atomic nucleus and the electrons, it is so big that if my fist would be a nucleus, where do you think the electron would be? Some people might say it would be there, it would be the other block. It would be something like 400 miles away. So matter is basically composed of empty space. So this idea, oh, I can touch it, which is...
Actually, you cannot touch. Yeah?
No. Well, nothing can ever touch. I mean, the fact that we think that we touch this is also questionable. We don't really touch anything because there are force fields that doesn't allow us really to touch things, But that's an objection, stupid objection of Samuel Johnson, which has been repeated in pragmatic, materialistic, utilitaristic philosophies. Is like saying, oh, because if I kick a stone, then I refute all these arguments. Yeah, but you're refuting nothing, you're just kicking a stone. If I am playing a video game and I'm kicking a stone, am I doing anything real? No. See, our technology allows us to think even further. The old argument of Plato of the cave. Remember that, right? You know, that we are in a cave looking at shadows, you know, people that are walking outside, carrying stuff over their head, etc. We see only shadows. And that's still a valid philosophical point. That's still a valid philosophical argument. That's why a good thinker has once said that all philosophy is always and only being a series of footnotes to Plato. Because it's true. Every argument, you can always bring it back to Plato. Anyway, I don't want to overcharge you. I think we have done enough, so we can open the discussion and have some fun on the topics we already discussed, and I can have some water. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, please. You can.